Affairs webpage are links to all of the forms and instructions for filling them out.
Right, so as Chris just mentioned, on the Academic Affairs website, if you go to the tab for faculty support, and it's kind of a long page, but kind of in the middle of the page are all the promotion and tenure forms and instructions that you need. And until very recently, a lot of this was all together in one document that was paper being passed around. And since then, it's been broken up into component pieces. So the things that you will need, first of all, the application is the first tab here, and you will fill that out. And by the way, for third year reviews, I think a lot of people just use the application as a form. The difference is you won't have external reviewers for the third year review. There's also a set of instructions for the applications as to what you'll need. And that will explain what you need to submit. There's a whole list, and I think you might have it on the next slide, Chris, if I remember.
I do, yep.
Yeah, so you'll need a current CV. You will have to upload your annual performance evaluations, including the third year review. Then for your departmental committee and your chair and so on that will be evaluating your work, you will be submitting information on your teaching evaluations, thesis, dissertation, committee service, if you have peer review of teaching and so on. You will need copies of your articles and your scholarship that will be uploaded, and then evidence of service. And I know no one wants to hear this, but if you're using Activity Insight, that's a good way to keep track of everything that you have, including your service.
That is presumably what you have it, yes.
I'm surprised you didn't start throwing things at me with that. Activity Insight will even generate the CV for you. It's one of the options that you have. If you want to flip back to
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to say, that with the evidence is the big thing there, right? So you have to provide the evidence of each one of those three areas.
Correct. Okay. And then starting, well, certainly this year, and for a lot of people last year, we started using Box to submit all this information. We had in the past actually had paper applications, and people would come with like 3 big binders, one for teaching, one for research, one for service. It got to be kind of clunky to pass around campus, especially once it got to academic affairs, and we had staff that were Meridian, and you're going back and forth. So we really needed an electronic way to do it. And so we started using Box. We have a process that will start in your department, and typically the administrative assistant will set up the whole Box structure. And there's safeguards put in place so that once you submit your application and so on, people can't go and change the information, okay, because there was concern about that. So you'll submit your application. Then at a couple of points in the process, you will be able to see what your committee report is. So there'll be a department committee report, and you will have a chance to respond. So that's another form you'll be using. So if you get the committee report and you see there's some error of fact, like maybe they're discussing your teaching evaluations and they said, in fall of 2018, this was the result of your teaching evaluations, and you're going, hey, wait a minute, I didn't teach that class in the fall of 2018. That's your chance to say, there's an error of fact in this application. So you would include that there. Otherwise, you would just sign off and say, yeah, I agree to this. And then, I think we'll talk about this a little bit too. The process can vary a little bit by college, because in smaller colleges, like the College of Business, for example, we don't have like a separate department and college committee. They're actually combined, and I think you all know about that. So there can be a little bit of variation here, but in most units, you'll have the departmental report. You will have the chair report. Then in a lot of units, you'll have another college report if you have a college executive committee like they do in arts and letters and science and engineering. And then finally, there's a dean report. And so you will also have a chance to respond to the college and dean report as well. But in any case, I would recommend that you take a look at all these documents now to see what's involved and what kind of information will be requested in the application.
Yeah.
Okay?
Anything from our panelists on that whole front of putting together a...
Yeah, one thing that I would recommend, I mean, one thing that I've noticed with the change of this faculty application form is that there's less room or less call for narrative, whereas in the annual form we still have more. So to me, it's kind of backwards. Like there's less room for narrative, explaining what you're doing in each field in the P&T application than there is in the annual report. So what I've been doing is encouraging faculty in our department to just go ahead and supply that. Make room for it. This is your chance. I mean, at the end of the day, even with all the requirements and whatever from the, each level from the department all the way up to the university, at the end of the day, you have to make your case. And the narrative is part of that, right? So I think that's important.
I have a quick question about just supporting documents, because I kind of looked at some of the application, pieces. And I was wondering, you listed some of the main categories, but, you could get really specific. So if you list all your, associations that you're part of, do they want to see like support for, because, somebody could just make it up, list it there, right? Or do they want to see your certificates of membership or your cards? So I was wondering how detailed does one have to get? Because I've seen some applications that are literally 3-4 binders thick, and I wonder how much did they include versus, having some of the 5-6 basic things that you listed here, which makes it a very small binder.
I think there's a wide variability in that, in how detailed you are in your documentation. If it could possibly be disputed, and I guess it would depend on your own level of paranoia as far as that goes, you might have, right? How much documentation if it's clear, I'm a member of the American Society of Health Systems Pharmacists. I can just put that down. I don't have to screenshot the fact that, but I could, and you could have documentation for everything. I think if it's something that might beg a question, or someone might say, well, what is that like? I don't know what that is. You might want to have some more supporting documentation for some of those kinds of activities. But that does mean you do have to, it's talking about evidence, right? So if you have to have evidence of all of these things, sometimes evidence is enough to say that I'm a member of. And sometimes evidence means you actually have to show what that event was that you attended, or that speech that you gave, or that program that you were a part of. We've been joined by another panelist, too.
I have tenure, so I can
introduce yourself?
That's allowed. I'm, is this on? I can't tell. Yeah. I'm Matt LeVay. I'm associate professor in the English department. I'm also the director of graduate studies in English. I don't know what the other panelists said for intros,
nope,
but
I'm
yeah. Okay, good.
You keep on going.
Okay, yeah, sure. No, I'm happy to be here. I attended a version of this workshop in my first year at ISU, 2014, and that was incredibly helpful in some sense because I had been at a non-tenure track position before coming to ISU. And so it was useful to think about tenure in a very concrete way. It was also very useful just to start out thinking about the process of tenure so that I wasn't trying to scramble to put everything together at the last minute. If that is you, that'll be okay too, but it's preferable if it's not. But yeah, thanks for inviting me, and I'll be on time for the next one.
Oh, you're good. Thank you very much.
I have a quick question regarding when we have an opportunity to respond to reports. If we're signing that, does it mean that we've reviewed it, or does it mean that we agree with what was written?
That's an excellent point, and it's kind of like what you do with your annual evaluations. There is a box that you check that I have read this, And then there's a box that says, I'm responding to this or I'm not
Okay.
responding to this. So it means that you've read it first and foremost, but you can also indicate, but I'm responding to it with some corrections or some commentary.
And there is a time frame too. I think you have like 5 days
Yes.
to respond.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris, question in Meridian.
Yeah, sure.
So on the third bulleted item, annual performance reviews for reappointment, including the third year review. So my
Yes.
offer letter states I can go up in my third year. So I won't have a third year review. Is that a problem or?
Not if it's in your offer letter that explicitly states that.
Thanks.
There you go. Yes.
How are scholarship and creative activities that don't lend themselves to be easily uploaded to Box being managed?
Well, yeah, some of us write books and there's no place
Yeah.
to put a book in Box.
I am not sure.
I use my page proofs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Although some people don't want that just floating around too, you know?
I mean, typically it shouldn't be floating around. I mean, I think if you're an external reviewer for a tenure committee for research, that comes with the commitment to review, that you don't circulate somebody's stuff. In terms of internally at the university, I think that's same principle, right? It should only go to people in the pipeline. But yeah, but there are certain works. Where I can see people, if it's something like if your page proofs are quite rough, maybe you don't want that to be what's there. But
It's a problem.
yeah,
Did that answer your question? Or do you have other examples that maybe you want to?
It's-
if you have a textbook or a book, I mean, are people just like taking a picture of the cover and including that?
Right, yeah, the link to Amazon, it says this is, I mean, that
But
gives
part
you
of
the
it for like
information.
external
For- they wanna
reviewers,
read
they need access to the actual scholarship. So
That is
it's actually a really serious problem. I don't know that there's a good solution for it.
You could always ask your.
I would ask.
You could ask your publisher to give them a certain number of access codes that are valid for only a certain period of time.
Oh, I guess that's a possibility too,
Yeah.
if you go to the publisher for that. Sure.
Yeah, particularly in the humanities, I know a lot of publishers are they understand, especially a university press or an academic publisher knows, what a constraint a tenure timeline is, and they're usually willing to help with that if you need digital copies of something for this specific purpose. And you would make that clear to them, talk to your editor or whomever the contact is.
So based on slightly bad experience with the third year review, the current curriculum vitae, there is no format on our department level or the college level that actually says this is what the CV needs to look like. And then even in the application form, I've had the situation where it said, list the independent studies, the course number, the title, the student, the year. And I did that, but I got dinged because I did not include that those students also went on to present in conferences or published, but that wasn't asked of me, so I didn't include it. And when the information was solicited, it was decided that it cannot be weighed into my teaching record because I didn't provide it initially. So how do you advise faculty in this area saying, when there's a discrepancy between what the application form or says, or say, provide a CV, and informal expectation or unspoken expectation that I am not aware of?
Well, I think, unless the panelists want to weigh, I would think the expectations should be made as explicit as possible to you. And that's why we've said all along, these are the general parameters. This is the P&T application that includes the general information, but there are discipline-specific ways of handling a lot of these things, and that's where you, with a very frank discussion with your department chair, is absolutely essential so that you have what you need and in the format that they're expecting to have that is appropriate for your discipline. And I guess I can't say that enough, that it has to be appropriate for your discipline.
I think part of the problem is that some departments don't necessarily have explicit
Yeah.
T&P guidelines, and they need to get them. They need to, the department and sometimes it's because the junior faculty are the ones that are most affected by this. So, and that's a hard dynamic too. But, it's maybe having that hard discussion and saying, look, we need an explicit T&P policy for our department. if you don't. But I think oftentimes those problems come when that happens.
Yeah.
Another thing that helps too, that, I was on the college executive committee, and so I'm a historian and I understand what our department guidelines are. I have no clue about, especially things like, music and art. I don't know what that is. So one thing that I found really useful, both for at every level of review, whether it's you as the applicant or the chair or a department committee, to explicitly state in our department, creative activity, includes this, and that, and for promotion, here are the expectations. A quick sentence or two really can help. So in my chair's evaluations now, even for the annual reviews, I'll make a statement saying something like, for promotion and tenure in history, for research, it's a book or 4 journal articles, roughly. Obviously, it's much more complex than that, but it gives other reviewers that aren't familiar with history a general sense of what's requested. I think in teaching and service, it's a bit more general, but the research and creative activity varies widely from department to department.
Yeah.
And college to college.
Could I just add to that? I think it's also important, again, going back to the external reviewers of your research, that, a department or a college that has a pretty set guidelines, like quantity in certain cases is important. How many articles do I need, right? That should be told if that's going to be something you're evaluated on. So if a college or a department, so English is the same as history, we say you need this many. Now there's variations there, but we give a number, so that when your materials are sent to an external reviewer, that external reviewer is not evaluating you for tenure at their institution. They're evaluating for tenure at your institution at ISU. So they can say, okay, well, here are the guidelines for what constitutes superior or whatever research activity at Idaho State, and they can make a judgment on that basis. Just to add one quick thing to what Zach was saying too, about if your department doesn't have T&P guidelines. I would also say that if your department does have T&P guidelines, it's always good to, as a department, be in the habit of revisiting those to make sure that have there been any developments, or are we adding sub-disciplines within our department that maybe have different expectations, or that field has different assumptions, and making sure that we're able to address those too, so that people working in a subfield don't feel as they go up for tenure, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't speak to me and I didn't know it.
Yeah, that was a point that we could have made earlier about one more thing that the department chair worries about in terms of not only getting the external review letters, but as a part of that process, they need to let the external reviewers know this is the P&T process here. Here is our department-specific guideline, which may include this is what we're looking for in terms of scholarship. This is superior. This is above expectations. This is what meets, et cetera. All of that is sent to the external reviewer too, which goes back to the idea of why it's so hard to be an external reviewer, because you have to basically familiarize yourself with this whole other institution's policy and then provide a thoughtful external review. It takes a lot of time and effort. Yeah. Yes?
I'm kind of going back to a point that you made, that if previous scholarship should be counted towards your tenure, it has to be on your offer letter, you said. But what if you did not negotiate for it, but it's in the guidelines of the department? That should count as a college, right?
Exactly, because and it may be that there are department-specific guidelines related to work that was done prior to. I don't know. Is that something that you guys have?
I know that there are departmental guidelines, at least from my department, about work that was published before you came to ISU. Now, so in my own case, I had written a draft of my book manuscript. But then revised it substantially when I was here, and then got the contract, and it was published during my review for tenure, and that's all considered, that all counts, right? Because the bulk of the work and the contract for publication all happen at ISU, but there may be publications that sort of skirt that line a little bit. I know in my own department, it depends on the publication date. They tend to be a little more generous. Now, if it comes, I don't know what happens if it's published the week you arrive in Pocatello.
Mine was the month before I got here.
Oh, good. Yeah. That's good. But look at you now, so it's all right. Sorry.
I got lucky.
But I mean, you see the point of what this is supposed to be doing in terms of evaluating your scholarship, your contribution to ISU, you can see how the bulk of the weight of what they're evaluating ought to be on the work that you did while you were here in your faculty appointment. I mean, that's kind of the spirit of the idea is getting credit for what you've done while you've been at ISU. Not totally disregarding what you did before you got here, but realizing, well, you're seeking tenure at this institution, so what have you done at this institution during your time here? It's got to count for more, at least.
Yeah, I think there are really wildly varying assumptions and positions on this. I mean, everybody that's going to interpret this is going to look at it differently. And I think that even within a department or a college or, so I think that, I mean, what I was told, because my book came out the month before I started here, and this was my number one question when I arrived. And the response to me by the dean and the provost and others was, and the chair, we want to see you continue to publish. And then my question was, how much? Give me a number. I'll do whatever you want me to do, but I need to know what that is, right? I'll work hard, but how hard, right? I mean, I'll publish, but how much? That's, and I think really getting down and drilling down to that is the issue. Because, and prior, how prior? Is this 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or is it last year? All of these are questions that will come into it. And again, this is why at the end of the day, when you put your application forward, you have to build your narrative, and you're basically a lawyer making your case that I deserve tenure at this institution based on these policies.
I have another question related to first author, second author, etc. There's not really clear guidelines in terms of that, and we have some faculty that say, oh, you have to be first author on blah, 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 but there's no guidelines stating that. So I guess that's my question.
Yeah, there's nothing at the university level that way. That goes back to the idea of discipline specific, and you'll see that sometimes the policy is really, really clear in even rank ordering what these are, and then your placement on that paper or that grant. It's true, that will be discipline specific, and I don't think you're gonna find a general guideline, and my own personal bias might be to maybe don't be too specific on that front. You need enough to be working on and knowing this is what's expected of me, but we can maybe put it too prescriptive sometimes that way. But again, that's gonna be discipline specific, and far be it from me. I mean, my field is pharmacy. If anyone's like really detail oriented, it's my group, but you're gonna find differences in disciplines. It's a good question, first, second, third author, or maybe you're the last author, and maybe in your field that's best to be at the end, right? I mean, Avengers, this is with Chris Pratt, with Samuel L. Jackson. I mean, they're always at the end, but they're big stars. So
Now you
it
tell
really
us.
depends. Right? I don't know if I answered that, but it is discipline specific. Did you want to?
I was just going to say, I mean, and this comes back to what I was saying about subdisciplines too. So in English, I mean, in literary studies, it's unfortunately uncommon to co-author work. We tend to be more siloed. In linguistics and rhetoric and composition, which are also included in our department, it's not. Or in philosophy, we're also the Department of English Philosophy. It's not uncommon. And I know philosophy has its own guidelines, but for English, we finally clarified because we had a number of people in rhetoric and composition who were coming up for tenure, and so we said, like, here's the, a co-authored work counts in the same way as single-authored work, provided, it's from, I think we say something like a reputable scholarly publisher. And of course, reputable is known in fields, scholarly is known in fields. And that was an attempt to address that while still being pretty lenient, just thinking about, different, because again, in rhetoric and composition, you might have something that's authored by 3 people. It's uncommon to have something authored by 10, whereas in other fields that, in rhetoric and composition, frankly, a lot of times where your name appears in the list is due to the alphabet, more so than it is to any sense of how much has been contributed to a particular project. That's not the case in other fields. So we wanted some guidelines that kind of spoke to our area to be approved by our faculty, but other departments should probably do it too.
My question is for Janet. Do we have a specific CV requirement in biology? Is there a format we can follow?
No. I mean, for our department, we have very clear guidelines that have been in place for a long time that we revisit frequently. We evaluate, I mean, as Chris mentioned, we evaluate the totality of everything, and that includes what you did in your postdoc or anything else. Now, we want to see a trajectory. I mean, we're looking for the direction that you're gaining momentum and, you know, that you haven't stopped publishing or writing grants or whatever, but it is the totality of everything. And often faculty that come in with experience negotiate for some portion of that to count. And so we do that as well with faculty that have had prior positions. But as far as the CV, it's pretty much the standard CV that anyone in the sciences really would use. I mean, it's one piece. I agree that you want to have a narrative as well, though, as part of your application. But the guidelines for our department, and they align with the college level one as well, but are pretty specific about those steps. Plus, your committee will help with that and will request materials as needed and work with you to make sure everything's there. We want you to be successful. We've invested a lot in going through the process of hiring faculty and evaluating them. We want you to be successful. So we want to do what we can to make sure you are. And I think I speak for all of us.
You absolutely do.
Say that.
Yeah, we're silent, but that doesn't mean that we're not agreeing.
Yes.
It's like, no, she's speaking for herself. No, we're absolutely that way. I mean, that's the way I hope we're fostering it throughout the university. That would be my hope, my expectation.
So as we become more intimate with our department level recommendations or criteria and then moving on up the route, I'm wondering what the panel's recommendation and then Chris, your recommendation about actually including our perception of here are the behaviors and evidence connected to a certain rating. So this is what would be equivalent to excellent, this is what would be equivalent to good, or is that something that we should more reserve for the committee to provide that ranking?
So are you referring to your own kind of personal narrative as you are putting together your application?
Correct.
You're rating basically, you're doing a self-evaluation of here's what I think that I have achieved. I don't know, do you guys
and here's the
you
evidence
talked
to
about
support
narrative.
within those categories. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a tough one, I think, especially like in history. One of my big issues right now is that, you know, if you're writing a book, it's going to take you several years. So does that mean every year that you're working on that book and you don't publish something, you get average or below average or whatever it is, and then that book is going to come out and it's going to come out in one single year, and you get super extraordinary, awesome that year, and then the next 3 years that nothing comes out, you get nothing. It's kind of the rating system is a problem to me for a lot of reasons. But I think again, pushing the department to sort of try to articulate that, to try to articulate those things. I mean, there is a way to show that you're making progress on something, or how much work in a year is equivalent to which rating. I think that's another step that probably a lot of departments and colleges need to sort of work out. To me, I mean, it's a kind of a mystery to me, to be honest.
Well, and yeah, I mean, these are two related processes going on, right? You've got the annual evaluation process where you do have kind of the narrative that you get to talk about what you did that year and why you met or exceeded expectations. But at this P&T level, you've put together your application. Now you're commenting on your collective scholarship over the last 5 years that's going towards this. And what you're asking is, at least I think in part, is do you make a comment on that and say, based on my understanding of this, well, of course, you're going to be honest, but at the same time, you're going to want to put it in the best possible light, right? And say, I think this exceeds the expectations, or this is an excellent body of scholarship that I have accumulated. I mean, is that kind of where you're going with that? Because I think that's what the personal narrative part of this is. And you can include personal. I remember when I went up for P&T, I wrote a narrative about each one of my areas, and then I added the evidence for each one of those two. And in my narrative, you can describe, I think, the kinds of things that you're getting at here, unless I'm totally missing your question, which is entirely possible.
No, I think we're good. I'm just also thinking about, so specifically within our department, there are subcategories of good, excellent. We won't talk about the ones prior to that. And so by me providing evidence within, here's the evidence that is equivalent to a rating of good. Is it recommended that I do my own self-rating and provide, this is my recommendation and this is where I hit good, these are the behaviors and the evidence connected to excellent. I'm not sure that we have superior in our guidelines. Or is that something that we should reserve for the committee and just do our best to take them on the journey towards those specific requirements?
Right, where you kind of more show them rather than tell them.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, I'll be on. I did the latter. I think for me, I didn't feel like I could. I mean, you have your annual evaluations or your third year review, and you have a sense of how you meet the different benchmarks or different criteria. I didn't say, I didn't attempt to say, I should be ranked this and this, but I did. For me, the personal narrative was really important for each of the three sections, but it was really for me a way of kind of connecting things so that they didn't look disparate. So that you have so many conference presentations, or you have so many article publications, or you have so many service obligations, both the wrong and the right word. But you have all these things that you do, and for me, the personal narrative was a way to show that this was all purposeful. I wasn't just trying to publish a smattering of stuff, right? That it's all part of a research program, or it's all part of a kind of an attitude towards service, or an idea of what kind of service is meaningful for me at the department level and at the institution, just to kind of show how all of this stuff really connected. And I don't know if others find that strategy useful or not. I mean, I think I did, because I think it gave, every time I read, here's the recommendation of the chair, or I could always see that, this is, that they're using part of that narrative, or they're speaking to it and connecting it to those categories themselves. So it's almost like providing them, I thought of it more as providing the various committees, a way of understanding what I wanted them to see, or how all these things connected, and then they could put it into those to those categories.
That can lead us further into the process. Speaking of committees, right? So we started with the application, creating your narratives, creating your case. Well, how does it go from there? Department and or college committees then review the portfolio, they make a recommendation, and this is again where it becomes discipline and college and school specific in terms of the process that they have in place for selecting the committees that serve in this capacity. Committee members may themselves assign members of the committee to observe your teaching as peer review teaching. There will be student representatives. According to the ISU policies, students need to be on these committees, and you have to have a member from outside of the college or unit as well, so outside members too. So there's this departmental level of review that kind of culminates with the department chair reviewing the candidate's portfolio and report from the committee as well. And then from the department chair, it then can be reviewed by the individual faculty member, because that's your first step of it being done. And then that moves on to the college committee. But I include external reviewers here, but we've already really talked about this a lot thus far. This happens even at that departmental level, because remember, it was the department chair that was soliciting those external reviewers, and that whole, bringing in that aspect of external review happens at that departmental level with the department chair. So I included it there. But then it moves on to the college, where there can be a college committee, or like Joanne was saying, sometimes department and college committee are all in one, so you have to consult your own college for how that's done. But clearly there's a dean level of review also, which is what this is pointing to, where all the previous information from the college committee, from the department chair, the external reviewers, the portfolio itself, all of that is reviewed by the dean, who then makes his or her recommendation. The member, the candidate, can then respond to that as well. And then it moves from there to the provost's office, from the dean to academic affairs then, where all prior materials are reviewed and the process in general, just looking at timelines, was the right amount of response time given at every step? It's very much about the process at this level, and Joanne can speak to that more, because being in the provost's office, Joanne is at that level, and Alan and whoever the provost can assign and delegate to do this in KDHS. The VP of Health Sciences is actually, for this intent and purpose, part of the provost's office. So it's all at this level of review to the provost, which is what I'm saying right there. And then the provost, working with the president, provost makes that recommendation to the president, and then with last year, it was the president and the provost together sent out a letter that they both signed and said, congratulations or not.
And I believe that came out in April last year, and I think we're looking at the same timeline this year. And also, so you know, all the materials from the colleges are due to the provost's office. This year it was January 24th. So whatever deadlines your college and department set, it was so they could get everything to the provost by January 24th. Just so you know,
So
we
yeah,
don't
that's-
tell the colleges when they have to do those things specifically, but they need to align their processes so they can get it to the provost by that point in time.
That's right. It's at that level of review by basically the end of January. It's in the provost's office for this final step.
Correct.
And this is, again, reviewing your own policies and your own deadlines that are within your department so that you're able to meet that. And then we just have a few slides about criteria for consideration where, and we've gone through some of these, but we can reiterate as we need to, what's teaching, what's scholarship, what's service, right? And so the general guidelines do tell us what teaching is. It's kind of an easy one to pick out, where it's assigned classroom teaching, as well as any evidence of superior teaching, which might come in the form of awards and distinctions. Even publications related to that actually would bridge between both your scholarship and your teaching. Graduate supervision fits under this, undergraduate research, service learning, clinical supervision, continuing education that you give, that you teach, all of that is under teaching. And in the KDHS, we kind of combine the clinical teaching that you do along with the classroom, because a lot of the teaching that some of our clinical faculty do are actually in their clinics, in the hospitals, and that's their classroom. That's where they're teaching. But yeah, there's a question.
Yeah, so in terms of teaching, how do you evaluate, or how is it evaluated if you have you've taught a course with 4 students versus a course with 140 students? I imagine that the way that's evaluated should be a little bit different, but I'm not.
That's back to discipline specific and even course specific, because I think we can all point to courses within our own curricula, within our colleges, where I know what that class is like, and it may only have this many students, but I know the rigor of it, I know the time intensity that it takes, and I think that's part of your narrative as you describe the innovations maybe that you did to this class, or it's a class that was taught a certain way for a long period of time, but then you totally revamped it and changed it up. But yeah, you guys can all weigh in on that if you have comments as far as that goes.
Yeah, I mean, so when I went up for tenure last year, I think I had taught 13 different courses in my department, all of which were new to me since starting ISU. So everything was a new prep for a while. And obviously, those are all going to be different. What I do in, say, a first year gen ed writing course is going to be different than what I do in the Intro to Graduate Studies course for our MAs and PhDs. And I think that on the one, so not just enrollments, but on the other hand, just what your teaching is like, and then what students are commenting on in evaluations. I would say, just related to this, that if your department doesn't have people observe your teaching, maybe ask members of the committee to do so. English does this regularly, but they made sure that people on my committee, all of them observed one of my classes, and they tried to do different classes so they could see, what I teach, like in a graduate seminar versus, an intro undergraduate course. And I think that also helps kind of the committee speak to your skills in the classroom in a way that goes beyond course evaluations. I think everybody in this room probably knows the problems with course evaluations as a metric. And I think, in my case, my committee is aware of that too. So if you have good course evaluations, your committee might say these course evaluations are among the highest in the department. But at the same time, if your course evaluations, if you worry about those, the fact that you have committee members seeing what your teaching is like and saying, well, this person is teaching a course that is required of all of our majors. It has a reputation in the department or at the university. Those things are understood by a committee of people in your department. And so I think that the teaching observations can really go a long way in making some of these things a little bit more apparent, particularly when it then moves on to the college or to the provost. I think that can really help everybody in the process to see, oh, this is why this person is superior in teaching or is satisfactory in teaching because of these attributes, not just what number their students gave them for an 8 a.m. class.
We also, in our department, the student that's on your committee will actually go out and solicit feedback from maybe undergrads that have been in your classes or that have done research in your labs. Graduate students, if you've taught a graduate course, we'll talk to. So they will actually go out and interview or survey to gather information one-on-one. If you've team taught a course or guest lectured in a course, they'll talk to faculty that you might have taught with. So all of that information also gets rolled into not just the course evaluations or even the observations, because observations, I agree with them as that they're important, but they're also a snapshot. Have a good day, have a bad day, a bunch of students show up, a bunch of students don't show up. So that can be, that's one piece, but I think that there are other ways to get information about your effectiveness as a teacher. At least for us, I know that we actually go out and talk to students, or have the graduate student that's on the committee goes out and actually solicits feedback as well.
How many of you teach online?
Yeah.
Okay. You know what I did a few years ago when I was teaching and my department chair needed to evaluate my teaching? I added him to my Moodle site and said, okay, why don't you take a look at what I'm doing here? And you can do that for your online courses and your regular courses. They can go in and look at your syllabus, your assignments, and it's all right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, and that you have as many of these different inputs as possible, I think is really important to get that full picture. And utilizing students is actually, that's what we do in pharmacy as well. And they even go after some of the alumni too, the recent graduates, and say, so-and-so is going up for promotion and tenure, and then they interview them as well. I think that's all really useful information to get a full evaluation of teaching. And if you're on a P&T committee, you get to serve on that and you have a student, that's something that you could suggest that you charge the student with, because it'll be helpful information.
Chris, I have a question about dissertation committees. So what if you're an external person on a dissertation committee at another university? Is that still considered teaching, or does that go under service?
I would say service in that sense, because it's not this institution that you're teaching at, but someone else want to?
I think it depends on what capacity you are serving. I think if you're maybe contributing to the scholarly parts of it and you're helping to write it or run the research, I think that's a very different thing than if you're kind of an external committee member, just reading the document and providing input maybe at the end versus working on it all along.
Okay, thank you.
Put it in both categories.
Exactly.
And that's the trouble. A lot of these can span different categories. And trying to be really discreet about where to put things is just aggravating sometimes.
Your committee will put things all over the place.
You called that
They will.
service?
They'll put it in all categories.
It's everything.
It is.
Yeah.
I think this is, again, another place where you can influence the department culture. In our department, we talk a lot about how, especially with teaching evaluations, and even the questions that we had, they can be very easily discriminatory, especially for women and people of color and all of that kind of stuff. And there's tons of research to back this up. So one of the things that we did is revise our questions. And it was a junior faculty who encouraged us to do that, and we were very thankful for their suggestions. And we try to make those questions much more objective for students, not, things like, is this professor energetic or enthusiastic about the subject? I mean, how can you measure that? We have to think about how we assess students. They're also assessing our teaching. If you can't measure this thing, then why are we asking them those questions? So I think even revising that, and so I think that's part of it. Another thing is, again, building that case for yourself. If you're getting poor teaching evaluations, ask someone in the department, come evaluate me. Can you evaluate me and write something? I think I'm a good teacher. I think I'm doing well, but my students is not showing up on paper, right? It seems like it's going well. And there's also all the teaching materials that you're giving out.
Or, just to add to that, if you get low response rates in your evaluations, like it's not that your evaluations are bad, it's just the sample size is low. This is also a good way to kind of expand or sort of clarify the teaching portion of the application by having more voices.
Yeah.
All right. Move on to scholarship and creative activity. And we've kind of been through this already a little bit, but the question does come up, what counts as scholarship? And so we have here in the ISU policy very clear, we think, examples of what scholarship would be: books, original creative works, refereed articles, book chapters, non-refereed articles as well, technical reports, book reviews, grants and contracts, presentations, and then of course honors and awards associated with scholarship. But clearly we've left things off, and there's things that maybe we could talk about discipline specific that would fit for your particular discipline that aren't on this list. But questions about scholarship, what counts, etc. Scholarship, pretty clear when you see it, yeah, that's definitely scholarship. Okay. Then let's go to, is there a question?
I had a question.
You had a
Maybe
question.
you'll cover it.
All right.
I was wondering whether, putting together a symposium session, does that count to that, yeah. Does
So
that
putting
count
together
to
a symposium session.
at a conference,
Are
for
you
example?
speaking at that? And are you the one presenting your work from your lab or something that you're associated with? Or is it?
Yeah, but also like soliciting people and putting in a proposal that may or may not be accepted. Right? But you put, there's some competitive symposia.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Proposals out there. And so putting that on, takes some time. So does that count towards activity
Janet,
that's
do you want to take that?
That would be a blurry line between service and scholarship, I think. And I think your committee would evaluate it, and depending on your contribution to the symposium itself, that may push it into, if you gave talk or your students gave talks in it, that might count as scholarship, but the organization of it might count as service.
Yes.
I think also quickly that goes back to the like Matt's point earlier that, if you're presenting at a conference or you're organizing the symposium, how does it fit in with your research agenda? Is it something that's something way over here, but you're actually researching, writing about something else? How does it fit in, I think? And another question too is the impact of it. I think that's an important part.
I kind of have a piggyback on question, I guess, because she just mentioned, sometimes you just put things together. So a lot of us obviously put a lot of work in, whether it's a symposium, a presentation, a poster, and if you're part of a very competitive organization that only has very few slots at a conference to present, it could happen that, your presentation or whatever is actually not accepted, yet you put in the work. But usually when you actually don't present, you don't put it on your Vita or whatever. So is there a way to put some of this stuff on there? Because it seems like sometimes you have, a lot of work put in and then it's kind of like poof, gone, and, it's like as if it didn't exist, but you actually did think about it and tried, but, not everybody gets to present at a conference that only has so many slots that's nationwide. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, just occurred to me.
I'm thinking about a couple of poor, grant proposals or manuscripts that are still sitting there on my desktop. Where it's like, they were really good, nobody liked them, but
Yeah.
where Yeah, do you want to weigh
I
in
mean,
on that?
I think there are different things you can do. I think it's pretty customary, at least in my field, to say if there was an unfunded external grant proposal. I mean, even the applying for an extremely competitive external grant proposal, especially if you're a PI, put that, you can note that it wasn't funded, and people on the committee will understand that. I've also seen in some cases where people, especially if it's a journal, if they publish in a journal that's a little bit less known, they might put the acceptance rate of that journal to say, like, oh, well, this is actually quite competitive. There may be ways to do that with grants too, or with other things. I'm thinking of so a specific example, I was invited to moderate, this is really dorky, but it was the 75th anniversary of a really famous mystery. I work in crime fiction sometimes. There's a mystery magazine, and so they invited me to moderate. I was like, oh, cool. And I didn't get funding from the Office of Research to go because I had already gone to another thing. I just put that on my application, said I couldn't go due to a lack of travel funds, because that was an invitation that's squarely in my field, that shows ISU impact, but I couldn't go, and so I put it in there, and so I know of people who have done similar things. If you were, an unfunded trip, particularly if it was something big, I think could be something to put. I was accepted to this. I've also seen, this is customary in my field, I don't know about others, but so the major language and literature conference is in January every year, and getting out of Pocatello in January can sometimes be hard. So I missed that, but had to, gave my paper via Skype or had somebody read it in absentia. There's you just put a notation, for your paper and then read an absentia or delivered through Skype or something. That's just to show you I was accepted. I gave the paper. I wasn't there. Maybe I didn't use my travel funding because I was, stuck in Tremonton at an Arby's, for example, hypothetically. So there are ways in which you can list things that didn't come to fruition in one way or another, but show a kind of that show your work. Yeah.
Hi. My question is about who the audience is as you're preparing these documents. So we've talked a lot about how disciplinary specific information is really important. And so I'm curious, is it your department primarily they're the ones who are going to be reading these documents in the most detail, I assume, but should we have in mind our dean really, or someone further up the chain when it comes to giving some context for the information in these documents?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I would say, sort of go up the food chain, but I would say start with your colleagues. If you don't have the support of your colleagues, then it's going to be hard to get out of that, to get out of that swamp. So I would say first, it's because they're the ones in your discipline, in your department, who you work with. But I would say, but I've also seen cases where, the chair, for example, says, based on our policy, this person is sort of average, but I think they should get above expectations or whatever. And it's clear that, okay, the person's a really nice person and they're a good colleague, but haven't met some of the other benchmarks. So it's like, we really like this person, even though they may not necessarily, and I would say once you move up, that will hold less weight. At a department level, it's like, this person, we love being around them, they're a great colleague. But once you get up to the college level or probably the provost level, I would assume that doesn't matter as much.
I think your main audience is going to be your department and your colleagues, because they're going to write a report and that will move up, and that's going to be, I think, the major document. We like to think that everyone up the chain reads every piece of paper and clicks on every PDF that you put in there. But I would say that the report and your CV should encapsulate as much as it can. So your committee should be writing a report that will reach to your dean. When we get to the college level for our college committee, we have representation, and they can invite the chair of your T&P committee to come to the college meeting to answer questions or anything like that. So the college level committee can ask for additional information if maybe they're not as clear with maybe your scholarship and how that weighs in relative to other departments or things like that. But I think your main audience is going to be your department, and then making sure that you read that report. You should read that report and make sure, okay, when this goes to my dean or when this goes up, because the college will write a report as well that will move. So you want to make sure you're reading those things and that they really do capture the message you want to be sending as that moves forward.
I would just add, 100% I agree with that. From the provost level, so I have a doctorate in economics. I don't know what the discipline is like for dental hygiene, for example. So we rely on the department report because I have no idea what the standards of scholarships are across these various disciplines, and there's no way I can.
So yeah, at that level, it really is more about process, but that means that, yeah, there's a lot of weight that should be applied to the department level and the college level, because yeah, beyond that, I think that's too broad of an audience to try to write to anyway. And then service to the discipline, service to the university, service to the community. This is, again, what isn't teaching and what isn't scholarship that is worthwhile that you spend time on probably fits into service. And evidence of that can take all kinds of different forms as to how you want to back that up. Again, back to a narrative that describes this is what's important to me, this is how this links to my teaching, this is how this links to my scholarship, to create a comprehensive view of you as a cohesive individual with a focus and a trajectory. I think that's really the case that you're trying to make with your service as well. And then there are possible additional criteria as well, and I just turn to the KDHS policy, for example, which has elements related to professional integrity and collegiality. Some of the colleges actually do a collegiality ballot as a part of this process as well. Engagement, participation in the department, intellectual and academic leadership. A lot of these things you could kind of fit into service anyway, but a lot of these things are kind of elements that run through all of these kinds of things. And I know what some of the national AAUP is kind of against the idea of collegiality being a part of this.
Yeah.
Because it can be so subjective in many ways, but at the same time, we've all been in departments and colleges where you wish collegiality maybe was a little different than what it was, and that there could be some accountability somehow, somewhere. I mean, I'm seeing heads nod on both of these counts, so clearly I'm not going to settle this, but I raised it just because I was hoping to maybe spark something, and I did.
There's a lot to say here.
Good for me. But again, what I will go back and say is this possible additional criteria points to the fact where certain colleges and disciplines have created this, certain colleges and departments stay completely away from this, and even the ones who do don't go much more in depth than what I have bulleted pointed on this slide. And so you say, well, how does this figure into it, and how does it actually get written up, and where is it? Well, it can find its way into different aspects of this whole process, but it doesn't have really clear criteria. But they could be there. They could be there. And I think that'd be up for your different disciplines as you revise and revamp your P&T policies. Maybe you look at that. Maybe you don't. Matt, do you want to weigh in on this?
No, I just the idea of a collegiality ballot just sent a little shiver. That's a scary. No, we don't.
Yeah, and a lot of places don't.
Yeah.
And wouldn't even consider the idea, but there are colleges that do.
I think there's certainly a general sense, though, of everybody in the department taking stock of, is this person carrying their weight? Is this person, even if the person, and maybe especially if the person is super productive, right? They just care about their own research. They're not doing anything for the department. That's a common thing. So, and that's a hard one to figure out. Sometimes it's jealousy. This person's, they just published a book with whatever and all these articles, and they think they're a hotshot now, and they're not showing up for whatever, like that. That personal dynamic is real, whether we want to think it is or not.
Yeah. But I mean, the point that you just made was kind of the point that I was making, where it is something you kind of want to be able to evaluate people on, but it can be in the wrong hands. It's like the One Ring. It can be wielded in all kinds of different ways, and you got to be really, really careful. Okay, that's the last of my pop culture references for today. Stop the clock. We had a question about stop the clock earlier. Sometimes extenuating circumstances might prohibit a faculty member from being ready for this whole process that we've described by their 6th year, right? Because you have to after your 4th, but no longer past your 6th. But there are circumstances that can arise, and some of them are listed here, and they are the ones that are explicit in the policy. Here's the other thing. Stop the clock may only be requested prior to submitting your portfolio. So this isn't something where you got the portfolio going and, okay, wait a minute. This isn't maybe going the way I thought. Now I want to stop the clock. As long as it is done before that, and it is a request to the department chair explaining the circumstances and the proposed timeline, this is kind of why I want to take a step back and stop the clock. This is when I anticipate it starting again, and this will be my timeline from here on out. As long as all of that is cleared up with the department chair, signed, sealed, delivered before you've submitted your portfolio, that's why stop the clock is in there as a clause. And then specific policy information, we've talked a lot about just the general policy, and we've got it up here. You can get on the Academic Affairs website. And then I just have a couple of other examples here. KDHS's and Arts and Letters, for example, has posted their promotion and tenure policies. So I just want to reiterate with a couple of final bullet points here. Complete documentation as much as you can. Really saving your stuff as you go along is really the hardest thing to do. If you're a daily journaler or a daily scrapbooker, virtual or otherwise, and you keep all of your stuff, that's of course very, very helpful, because that documentation is what helps build the evidence in each of those areas that you need to provide. Regular ongoing effort to manage your own time is really important, and I think you have the opportunity with the annual evaluation process to take stock of that. How did I use my time this year? What am I planning for next year? Is this congruent with the goals that I have, given that I want to go up for P&T in this year? You really have to just kind of advocate for yourself and talk to your department chair about that so that they're in agreement and understanding and they understand. Meeting expectations. This is the last thing that I'll say. Meeting expectations every year on your annual evaluation is certainly an important goal to strive for, but just because you meet expectations every year doesn't mean that at the end of 4 or 5 or 6, whenever you go up, I've met expectations all the way along, it ought to be a slam dunk for promotion and tenure. That is not the case, because one can meet expectations as far as their faculty position is concerned, yet still not meet the criteria fully for being promoted and or tenured. They are closely linked, obviously. If you don't meet expectations, then you can clearly say, well, I probably won't meet the expectations for P&T. Any comments on that front from our panelists?
Oh, I would just add one thing, which is if there's, if in 1 year your annual evaluation says you are below expectations, that at the same time doesn't mean that you would not be awarded tenure automatically or something like that. I think sometimes there's a, correspondingly, right? Like, oh, if I meet expectations every year, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'll be awarded tenure, but it's also the same way that if you are below expectations 1 year, that doesn't mean you automatically will not get tenure either.
Yeah.
I have one quick question. You mentioned earlier, so obviously we all probably look forward to the point where we have all of our documents and ducks in a row and we're like ready to do this. So you mentioned then that you usually go to your administrative assistant in your department. They know how to put all the stuff on box, is that correct?
Yeah, they'll set up the box folder. You'll just have all the electronic versions of everything, and then at least I've seen that.
Yeah. Well, I guess my question is.
Okay, I was going to say.
It depends on your admin.
Probably that's also program specific.
Well, because we have like a new admin, and I don't think we've had this many promotions in the last few years since I've been here. So I'm wondering who would, if they have no clue what I'm talking about, or if they really don't know where to go, who would they talk to? Because obviously that's something that they would have to know. I can't really do that for them.
And they're at your department level. I would move up to your college level administrator.
Okay, so just
and then
kind
from
of
there it could go up to the Division of Health Sciences if you're in the KDHS, for example,
Yes.
and that administrative level can help with that whole process.
I was just wondering, because I know ours is very new, so she probably hasn't done it. So, just to know where to guide her to get that information.
For sure.
We actually put, I put everything in, I created the folders and put everything in box myself. I controlled all of that. When I was done, I shared it with my admin, who then set up the permissions of who could see it and who couldn't. So because the external letters get dumped into that, but I can't see those. So I had access to all of my documents, and I could see them, and I populated them, and there's a format, I'm sure you went over it, of how to label each folder and each subfolder. And I set all of that. I set all of that up, and I put everything in. And then I shared it with my chair and my admin, and they set up the permissions for the college and my committee members to see it. And then I couldn't see it. While they were working on it, I was denied permission. And then I was able to see the report, and that was shared. So I think that's what you were talking about, was more setting up the permissions. And I don't think the admins put all the documents in I mean, I wouldn't have wanted, I would not have wanted them to, and they would not have wanted to do it either, all of the evaluations and everything. It was much easier for me to put it in, because then I could work on it, which is what I did. I mean, I was able to go in and write things, and because I just built it in there as I was putting it together.
Yeah,
That's a good idea.
I had the same experience. I mean, I know our department admin. The only thing, like, she would set up, research, teaching, service, and then a general application for the form. And then it was sort of up to me to populate everything and kind of arrange it or title it how in accordance with guidelines, how I wanted to. The only exception was course evaluations, which she just automatically had the file to put in there for me, so I didn't have to gather. I mean, I have it, but that was the one thing. But I think different might be useful to ask. I mean, if you have a new admin in your department, it may be different, but to kind of ask what the expectations are. But I agree. I preferred being able to kind of work on things and put things together before I officially submitted it, and then access was restricted, just because that gave me a chance to kind of look at everything and see, well, maybe actually I want to say a little bit more about this now that I see this in front of me. I found that really helpful.
So I have a question for you. You said that in your department, and my department does something similar, that when you get your list of external reviewers, you're sending them that stuff quite early, late spring, early summer. What materials are you sending to them if we're working on a lot of our materials kind of over the summer, or are you expecting those to be done earlier?
We send the CV, we send our guidelines, we send the college guidelines, I think maybe the university ones as well, and the department ones. We send the CV, and then we usually ask our faculty to provide a research statement and a teaching statement, so that they have some feel for that. But we don't send, I mean, the entire package doesn't go. So we just get kind of the bullet information that we can send that will allow them to evaluate. We also tell them that we can provide additional information if they have questions or need additional information, but that's usually all we ask for.
You have the examples of scholarship that you send too.
Yeah.
Publications as well, yeah.
I thought external reviews are only for the research part.
Research, yeah.
So no teaching statement.
We include all of it.
Yeah.
Because for us, I mean, I feel like a lot of our teaching is also research related. It's graduate students, it's undergrads working in your lab. So there's a kind of a blurry line there. So we provide all of that. And usually on the CV is the list of classes that the faculty member has taught. So
I would say that varies across the university, actually, because some units only send the research because that's what they want external validation on.
And you go, to the actual ISU policy. What they explicitly state is your external reviewer needs to be someone who can comment on the quality of your research.
I'm just to reiterate, in English it's purely research. So we send the guidelines, the CV, research statement, and then just publications. But that's all. No teaching.
And in a lot of the health sciences, we actually do send the teaching as well as the research too. So it really is discipline specific.
Well, and I think part of what external evaluators look at too is when they're evaluating and they see that you're teaching 6 classes in one semester and they see that maybe you've only published 1 paper, well, hello, I mean, you've been teaching 6 classes in it. So, I mean, I think that there's a benefit to them seeing the totality of what you do here at ISU. Whether they evaluate, they can't really effectively evaluate the teaching if they don't see your teaching evaluations and haven't seen you teach. But seeing what you do as a whole faculty member, I think, can be valuable for them because, you know, some people at some universities, I realize they're supposed to evaluate you based on ISU standards, but, you know, I've seen a lot of letters and they usually say things like, well, at my university, blah, 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 but at ISU, you know, so there, it's hard to remove that from them to look at you in light of the environment that they're in. So I think providing, these are all of the things I do, and even if they're just evaluating your research.
Yeah. And I've seen the external reviewer letters talk to the fact that I can't really fully comment on the teaching, but and they'll make that statement,
Right.
but it looks like this, making the points that you're making, and some even that go on to say, and hey, they would be tenured at my institution. I mean, I've seen that too.
Yeah.
All right, last slide. Which has been all the way through, but if there are other questions, that's great. Let's thank our panelists, I think. Thank you very much. And hopefully this was helpful for you. And Joanne and I are available. And really, talk to your department chair. That's really where you can get the most specific guidance for your own situation. All right, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much. That was great. Chris.